The snowstorm had teeth that night. Marcus Webb felt them bite through his worn jacket as he trudged down Merchant Street, his boots leaving shallow prints in the fresh powder. The factory shift had run 3 hours over, and all he wanted was to collapse onto his lumpy couch with whatever leftovers he'd forgotten in the refrigerator. His fingers ached from handling frozen metal parts, and his back protested every step. The street lamps cast yellow pools of light through the falling snow, creating a world of shadows and silence. Most people had the good sense to stay indoors when the storms came this hard. The city of New Haven had a way of becoming a ghost town after dark, especially in the industrial district where Marcus lived. Abandoned warehouses loomed on either side of the street, their broken windows like hollow eyes watching his passage. He was 3 blocks from home when he heard it. A sound so soft he almost missed it beneath the wind's howl. A voice, thin and desperate, speaking words he couldn't quite make out. Marcus stopped, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He turned slowly, scanning the darkness between the buildings. Nothing, just shadows dancing in the STREETLIGH2. He shook his head, convincing himself it was exhaustion playing tricks. The factory had that effect sometimes, leaving him so tired he'd hear things, see things that weren't there. He continued walking, pulling his collar tighter against the cold. Then it came again, clearer this time. "Please. We just need food, ... anything." Marcus's heart skipped. The voice was real, and it was close. He spun around, his eyes searching the darkness more carefully now. For a moment, he saw nothing but the swirling snow and empty street. Then, near the entrance to a narrow alley, he spotted movement. 2 figures huddled against the brick wall, nearly invisible in the shadows. As Marcus took a cautious step closer, the streetlight caught them, and his breath stopped in his throat. An alien woman crouched there, her arms wrapped around a small child. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the telltale signs. Her skin held a faint luminescence, like moonlight trapped beneath the surface, and her eyes, those large, distinctive eyes, reflected the light with an otherworldly gleam. The child beside her was even smaller than he'd first thought, perhaps no more than 5 or 6 years old, with the same ethereal quality to her features. What struck Marcus most was their condition. Neither wore proper winter clothes. The woman had on a thin dress that might have been elegant once, but now hung in tatters. The child wore even less, just a simple tunic that left her legs and feet completely bare. Her tiny feet were pressed against the snow, red and swollen from the cold. Marcus's stomach tightened. He'd seen aliens in the city before, of course. Ever since the first ships had arrived 10 years ago, they'd become an uncomfortable part of New Haven's landscape. But the government had strict rules about interaction. Aliens were supposed to stay in their designated zones. Humans were forbidden from providing them aid or shelter. The penalties for breaking those laws were severe. Months in detention at minimum. Sometimes worse. The woman's eyes met his, and Marcus saw the fear there. She pulled her daughter closer, as if expecting him to call the guards or throw stones. Her lips moved, forming words that came out as barely a whisper. "Please, human. We just want a warm meal. For my daughter." The little girl peeked out from behind her mother's arm. Her hair was dark and hung in tangled strands around her face. Her eyes, those 2 large alien eyes, were filled with a hunger that went beyond food. It was the look of someone who'd forgotten what kindness felt like. Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing through calculations of risk and consequence. The smart thing would be to walk away, pretend he'd never seen them. The factories were full of stories about people who'd helped aliens and ended up losing everything. Their jobs, their homes, sometimes their freedom. But as he looked at that little girl, shivering in the snow with her bare feet turning blue, something inside him cracked. He thought of his own childhood, of winters when his family had nothing. He remembered the sharp pain of hunger, the deeper pain of being invisible to people who walked past without seeing. He remembered one man, a stranger whose name he'd never learned, who'd bought his family dinner when they'd had nothing. His hand moved to his pocket before he'd consciously made the decision. Inside, wrapped in a paper napkin, was half a sandwich he'd saved from lunch. It wasn't much, bread and processed meat, but it was still warm from being close to his body. Marcus took 3 steps forward. The woman tensed, her body coiling like she was ready to run. He raised his free hand in what he hoped was a calming gesture, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. When he was close enough, he crouched down and placed the wrapped sandwich on the ground, then backed away. The woman stared at the food, then at Marcus, her expression a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, making a small sound in a language Marcus didn't recognize. The words were musical, with a rhythm that reminded him of water flowing over stones. The woman reached out cautiously, as if expecting the food to vanish. When her fingers touched the napkin, she snatched it back quickly and immediately tore it open. She split the sandwich, giving the larger piece to her daughter. The child bit into it with such eagerness that Marcus felt his throat tighten. He watched the meat, watched the way the little girl's face transformed when she tasted the food. A smile, small but genuine, appeared on her lips. It was such a simple thing, that smile, but it carried the weight of relief and joy combined. The woman finished her portion and looked up at Marcus. Her voice, when she spoke, was rough with emotion. "Thank you." The words were heavily accented, but clear. She paused, then added, "I am Nira. This is Kessa." Marcus nodded, his own voice feeling thick when he replied, "Marcus." They regarded each other in silence, the snow continuing to fall around them. Marcus knew he should leave now, before anyone saw them together. But as he looked at Kessa, at the way she still shivered despite the small amount of food warming her stomach, at her bare feet sinking into the snow, he couldn't make himself turn away. The child's teeth were chattering, her small body racked with tremors. Nira pulled her closer, trying to share what little warmth she had, but it was clear they wouldn't survive the night out here. The temperature was dropping by the minute, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a decision forming before he could talk himself out of it. He thought about the empty apartment waiting for him, the extra blankets in his closet, the heater that actually worked. He thought about what would happen to this woman and child if he walked away right now. They'd be found by morning, frozen shapes in the snow that the sanitation crews would haul away without ceremony. He looked around carefully, checking for any sign of the patrol guards who made their rounds through this district. The street was empty, the buildings dark. Everyone with sense was indoors. If he was going to do this, it had to be now, before his rational mind could stop him. "Follow me," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible above the wind. "I can help you." Nira's eyes widened, her whole body going still with shock. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked down at Kessa, who was staring up at Marcus with those enormous eyes, then back at Marcus himself. He could see the war happening behind her expression, fear fighting against desperate hope. The little girl spoke in that liquid musical language, her voice so soft. Nira's response was equally quiet, but Marcus could hear the strain in it. They were debating, weighing the danger of trusting a human against the certainty of death from cold. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Nira nodded. The gesture was small, almost reluctant, but it was acceptance. Marcus turned and started walking, not looking back to see if they followed. His heart hammered against his ribs as he heard the soft crunch of footsteps in the snow behind him. Each step felt momentous, like he was crossing a bridge he'd never be able to recross. The life he'd known, the safety of anonymity and following the rules, that was ending with every footfall. The storm intensified as they moved through the streets, the wind driving snow into their faces. Marcus led them through back alleys and side streets, paths that avoided the main roads where patrol guards were more likely to appear. His building was only 6 blocks away, but it felt like miles in the bitter cold. Twice they had to stop and press into doorways as the sound of heavy boots echoed nearby. Each time, Marcus felt Nira's fear radiating beside him, felt the way Kessa buried her face against her mother's side, making herself as small as possible. The guards passed without seeing them, but each encounter left Marcus's nerves more frayed. When they finally reached the rear entrance of his apartment building, Marcus paused. This was it, the last chance to change his mind. Once they went through that door, he'd be breaking the law in a way that couldn't be undone. If they were discovered, everything he'd worked for would be destroyed. He looked at Kessa, at the way her lips had turned blue, at how she could barely stand on her frozen feet. He thought about the sandwich wrapper crumpled in her small hand. Still clutched like it was precious, Marcus pushed the door open and gestured them inside. The building's back stairwell was barely warmer than outside, but it was shelter from the wind. Nira entered first, pulling Kessa after her, both of them moving with the careful steps of people who'd learned not to trust their surroundings. Marcus followed, closing the door as quietly as possible. They climbed 3 flights of stairs, Marcus listening for any sound of his neighbors. The building was old, and most residents kept to themselves, but there was always the risk of someone looking out their peephole at the wrong moment. His apartment was at the end of the hall, the furthest from the stairs, which had always seemed inconvenient before, but now felt like a blessing. His hands shook as he fumbled with his keys. The lock clicked, and he pushed the door open, ushering them inside quickly. As soon as the door closed behind them, Marcus leaned against it, his heart racing. They'd made it. Against all odds and common sense, he'd brought 2 aliens into his home, breaking laws that could cost him everything. As the reality of what he'd done settled over him, Marcus wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Then he saw Kessa's face as the warmth from his heater reached her, saw the way her expression transformed from misery to something like wonder. And he knew that, mistake or not, he couldn't have chosen differently. The night was far from over, and the real challenges still lay ahead. But for now, in this moment, 2 beings who'd been freezing in the snow were warm and safe. Sometimes, Marcus thought, that had to be enough. Marcus's apartment was small, barely 400 square feet, divided into a main room that served as both living area and bedroom, a cramped kitchen alcove, and a bathroom the size of a closet. The walls were thin enough that he could hear his neighbors' conversations, and the single window overlooked a brick wall 3 feet away. But tonight, with Nira and Kessa standing just inside his doorway, the space felt different, almost sacred. The heater in the corner chugged away, its orange coils glowing like a miniature sun. Kessa moved toward it immediately, drawn by the warmth like a moth to flame. She sank down onto the worn carpet, holding her small hands toward the heat. Her feet were an alarming shade of purple-red, swollen and clearly painful. "Wait," Marcus said softly, moving to his bathroom. He returned with a basin of lukewarm water and 2 towels. "Her feet, the warm air will hurt at first. This will help." Nira watched him with those luminous eyes, still wary, but less guarded than before. She knelt beside her daughter and gently guided Kessa's feet into the water. The little girl whimpered, tears forming in her eyes. But Nira spoke to her in their musical language. Soothing and encouraging, Marcus retreated to his kitchen alcove, giving them space while he heated a pot of soup. It was canned vegetable, nothing fancy, but it was hot and filling. As he stirred, he found himself stealing glances at them. Nira's features were striking in the apartment's light, her skin's luminescence more pronounced, now that she wasn't shrouded in shadow. She had high cheekbones and a delicate bone structure that would have been beautiful by any species standards. Her hair, a deep shade between black and blue, fell past her shoulders in waves. She caught him looking and quickly averted her gaze, her posture tensing. Marcus turned back to the soup, feeling heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the steam. "I have some clothes," he said, keeping his voice even. "They'll be too big, but they're warm and dry. There's a bedroom partition I can pull across to give you privacy." Nira's response was quiet. "You've already done so much. Why?" Marcus ladled soup into 2 bowls, considering the question. He'd been asking himself the same thing since the moment he'd placed that sandwich in the snow. "My mother used to say that kindness isn't about deserve or earn. It's about recognizing when someone needs help and choosing to give it." Your mother sounds wise. "She was," Marcus said, the past tense sitting heavy in his mouth. "She died 3 years ago. Pneumonia. I'm sorry." He brought the bowls to them, along with a box of crackers. Kessa's eyes grew wide at the sight of the food, and this time, when Nira offered her the bowl, the little girl took it with both hands, drinking the warm broth carefully. The sound of her satisfied sigh made Marcus smile despite everything. They ate in silence, the only sounds the storm outside and the heater's gentle hum. When they finished, Marcus showed them where the bathroom was and gave them some of his clothes, sweatpants and t-shirts that would hang loose on Nira's frame, but would at least be warm. He pulled the partition across his sleeping area, creating a small private space for them. While they changed, Marcus stood by his window, watching the snow continue to fall. The street below was empty, the storm keeping even the patrol guards indoors for now. But morning would come, and with it new dangers. A soft sound made him turn. Nira had emerged from behind the partition, wearing his gray sweatpants rolled up at the ankles and a faded blue t-shirt. Her hair was damp. She must have washed her face. And without the grime of the streets, she looked younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 30, though he had no idea if alien aging worked the same as human. "Kessa is asleep," she said softly. "She hasn't slept properly in days. We've been running for so long." "Running from what?" Marcus asked, then quickly added, "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." Nira moved to the window, standing beside him, but keeping a careful distance. She was shorter than him by several inches, and he found himself hyper-aware of her presence, the way she smelled faintly of something sweet and unfamiliar. "From the research facility," she said finally, "on the east side of the city. Do you know it?" Marcus nodded. Everyone in New Haven knew about the facility. It was where aliens were taken for processing and integration, though no one really knew what happened inside those gray walls. "They took us there 3 months ago," Nira continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said it was routine documentation. But once we were inside, they separated families. They took Kessa from me, and I didn't see her for 2 weeks. Her hands clenched into fists, and Marcus could see them trembling. When they finally brought her back, she had marks on her arms. Injection sites. She wouldn't speak for days, just stared at nothing." Rage bubbled up in Marcus's chest, hot and sharp. They experimented on her? On a child? They wanted to understand our biology, our weaknesses. There were others there, dozens of us. Some didn't survive. Nira's voice cracked. "I knew if we stayed, Kessa would be next. So I found a way out, during a storm not unlike this one. We've been hiding ever since, moving from place to place, but the guards are always looking, always hunting." Marcus felt sick. He'd known the government's treatment of aliens was harsh, but this was monstrous. "The marks on your arm," he said, remembering the scar he'd glimpsed earlier. "That's from there too?" Nira nodded, pulling up her sleeve to reveal a series of thin scars that glowed faintly. as if they'd been burned into her skin with light rather than heat. A tracking device. They implant them in all of us. I managed to cut mine out, but it left this. Can they still track you? No, not anymore. But they know I'm somewhere in the city, and they know I have Kessa. They won't stop looking until they find us. The weight of what Marcus had taken on suddenly felt crushing. This wasn't just about sheltering someone from a storm. Nira and Kessa were fugitives, and by helping them, he'd made himself an accomplice to their escape. A sudden knock on the door made them both freeze. Marcus's heart leaped into his throat. Nira's eyes went wide with terror, and she took a step back toward the partition where Kessa slept. The knock came again, harder this time, followed by a voice Marcus recognized with sinking dread. Webb? I know you're in there. Open up. It was Mrs. Halstead, his neighbor from across the hall. The woman was 60 years old, with nothing better to do and monitor the comings and goings of everyone in the building. She'd never liked Marcus much, considered him too quiet, too standoffish. Stay behind the partition, Marcus whispered to Nira. Don't make a sound. He moved to the door, his mind racing. Had she seen them enter? Had she heard them talking? He took a deep breath and opened the door just wide enough to show his face. Mrs. Halstead stood there in her ratty bathrobe, her gray hair in curlers, arms crossed over her chest. Her sharp eyes tried to peer past him into the apartment. I heard voices. You got someone in there? Just the television, Marcus said, keeping his voice casual. Couldn't sleep, so I put on a movie. Television? Your television's been broken for months. I know because you asked about my repairman. Damn, he'd forgotten about that. Got it fixed last week. Mrs. Halstead's eyes narrowed. I also heard footsteps. Multiple sets. On the stairs. Around the time you came home. Must have been someone else, Marcus said. Look, Mrs. Halstead, I appreciate the concern, but it's late and I've got an early shift tomorrow. I've got a duty to report suspicious activity, she said, her chin lifting. There's been talk of alien fugitives in the area. The guards put up notices. Marcus's blood ran cold. I haven't seen any aliens, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't waste the guards' time with false reports about me. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Marcus could see the calculation in her eyes. Finally, she sniffed. Fine, but I'm watching. One wrong move, Webb, and I'm making that call. She turned and shuffled back to her apartment. Marcus closed the door and locked it, leaning against the wood with his eyes closed. His hands were shaking. She suspects. Nira's voice came from behind him. We should go. We'll put you in danger if we stay. Marcus turned to find her standing there, her face pale with fear, already moving toward the partition to wake Kessa. No, he said firmly. You can't go back out there. The storm's worse now, and Kessa's feet need time to heal. Besides, if you leave now, it'll just confirm Mrs. Halstead's suspicions. But she'll call the guards. Maybe, but maybe not. She likes to complain, but she's not usually one to actually follow through. Even as Marcus said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. Mrs. Halstead had looked more determined than usual. Nira wrapped her arms around herself, looking small and lost in his oversized clothes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry we brought this to you. Don't, Marcus said, moving closer without thinking. Don't apologize for wanting to keep your daughter safe. You did nothing wrong, but you could lose everything because of us. Then that's my choice to make. He was standing close to her now, close enough to see the way her eyes reflected the room's light in shades of silver and gold. I'm not going to let them take you back to that place. Either of you. Something shifted in Nira's expression, the fear giving way to something else. Gratitude, yes, but also a kind of wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Why would you risk so much for strangers? You're not strangers anymore, Marcus said softly. Not after tonight. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken things. Then Nira did something unexpected. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm, her touch gentle and warm. The contact sent a strange tingling sensation through his skin, not unpleasant, just different. "Thank you, Marcus Webb," she said, her accent making his name sound like music. "I don't know how I'll ever repay this kindness." "You don't need to repay anything," he said, acutely aware of her hand on his arm, of how close they were standing. "Just stay alive. Both of you. That's enough." The sound of sirens in the distance shattered the moment. They both tensed, Nira's hand falling away from his arm as they moved to the window. Below, 3 patrol vehicles were moving slowly down the street, their lights cutting through the snow. They weren't moving quickly, just making their rounds, but their presence was a stark reminder of the danger. One of the vehicles slowed in front of Marcus's building. His stomach dropped. 2 guards got out, their dark uniforms stark against the white snow. They seemed to be examining something, perhaps the footprints that hadn't yet been covered by fresh snowfall. "They're tracking us," Nira whispered, her voice filled with horror. "The snow are footprints." Marcus's mind raced. If the guards came up here, if they knocked on doors asking questions, Mrs. Halstead would tell them everything. They had minutes at most. "The bathroom," he said suddenly. "There's a ventilation shaft that connects to the roof. It's small, but you might fit. We can't leave you to face them alone. You won't be. You'll be hiding, not leaving. If they don't find you, they can't prove anything." He moved quickly to the bathroom, pulling a chair over to reach the ventilation grate. "Come on, we don't have time to argue." Nira hesitated for only a second before moving to wake Kessa. The little girl stirred, confused and sleepy. Nira spoke to her in their language, urgent but gentle, and Kessa nodded, her eyes still heavy. Marcus had the grate off by the time they reached the bathroom. The shaft beyond was dark and narrow, but it led up to the roof access. "Can you climb?" "Yes," Nira said. She lifted Kessa onto the chair, then into the shaft. The little girl moved surprisingly nimbly, her small size an advantage in the tight space. Nira followed, pulling herself up with practiced ease. "Stay quiet," Marcus whispered up to them. "No matter what you hear, don't come down until I come get you." Nira's face appeared in the opening, her luminous eyes meeting his. "Be careful." Then she was gone, pulled up into the darkness. Marcus replaced the grate just as the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. He quickly moved the chair back, checked that there were no obvious signs of Nira and Kessa's presence, and had just settled onto his couch when the knock came. This knock was different from Mrs. Halstead's, authoritative, demanding. "This is the patrol guard. Open the door." Marcus took a breath, forced his racing heart to slow, and went to answer. When he opened the door, 2 guards stood there. Officer Brennan, who'd been walking this beat for years, and a younger guard Marcus didn't recognize. "Evening, Webb," Brennan said, his eyes already scanning the visible parts of the apartment. "Mind if we come in?" Marcus knew he couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. "What's this about?" "We're conducting a search. There are reports of unauthorized aliens in the area. We're checking all residences." Marcus stepped aside, keeping his expression neutral, even as his stomach churned. The guards entered, their eyes moving over everything. Brennan walked to the partition, pulling it aside to reveal Marcus's sleeping area. The extra blankets he'd given Nira and Kessa were there, still folded. "You live alone?" Brennan asked. "Yes, sir." "Your neighbor reported hearing voices." "I had the television on. Just got it fixed." Brennan moved to the television, pressing the power button. Nothing happened. He tried again, then looked at Marcus with raised eyebrows. Marcus's mind went blank for a second, then recovered. Damn thing's temperamental. Works sometimes, doesn't others. That's why I was going to get it fixed again. The younger guard was checking the kitchen, opening cabinets. He found the pot Marcus had used for soup, still sitting on the stove. This is still warm, and there are 2 bowls in the sink. Marcus's heart hammered. I was hungry. I ate twice. Twice? Brennan's tone was skeptical. Been a long day. Look, if this is about aliens, I haven't seen any. Check the whole place if you want. Brennan did exactly that, moving methodically through the apartment. He checked behind the partition again, looked under the bed, opened the closet. When he reached the bathroom, Marcus held his breath. The guard poked his head in, shining his flashlight around the cramped space. Marcus waited for him to notice something, anything that would give away Nira and Kessa's presence. But the ventilation grate looked undisturbed, and the bathroom was too small to hide anyone. After what felt like an eternity, Brennan came back to the main room. Everything seems in order, he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied. But I'm going to be frank with you, Webb. That alien woman and her kid, they're dangerous. They escaped from a government facility. The woman attacked multiple guards during her escape. Marcus fought to keep his expression neutral, even as rage burned in his chest. Attacked guards? More likely she defended herself and her daughter from whatever horrors they'd been subjected to. If you see them, Brennan continued, you call us immediately. Don't try to help them. Don't engage. They're not to be trusted. Understood? Understood, Marcus said, the lie tasting bitter. The guards finally left, and Marcus closed the door behind them, his legs nearly giving out. He waited, listening to their footsteps recede down the hall, then disappear entirely. Even then, he waited another 5 minutes before going to the bathroom dot. He climbed onto the chair and opened the ventilation grate. They're gone, he whispered up into the darkness. A moment later, Kessa's small face appeared, followed by Nira's. They climbed down carefully, and Marcus helped them onto the floor. Kessa was shaking, her eyes wide with residual fear. Nira pulled her daughter close, her own body trembling. That was too close, she said. We can't stay here. They'll come back. Marcus knew she was right. Tonight had been a near miss, but their luck wouldn't hold forever. I know someone, he said slowly. An old friend. Thomas Ridge. We grew up together, served in the factories together. He's involved with people who help aliens. Nira looked up sharply. The Resistance? I don't know if they call themselves that, but yeah. People who think the government's policies are wrong. Thomas mentioned it once, years ago, but I never followed up. I can find him tomorrow, see if he can help. That's asking him to risk as much as you. Thomas would do it. He's got a good heart. Marcus moved back to the main room, his mind already working through the logistics. For tonight, you'll stay here. Tomorrow, I'll go to him. We'll figure out the next step. Nira nodded slowly, exhaustion and relief warring on her face. I don't know how to thank you. You already did, Marcus said, thinking of the warmth of her hand on his arm, the trust in her eyes when she'd climbed into that ventilation, shaft based solely on his word. They settled back into the apartment, Marcus taking the couch while Nira and Kessa took his bed behind the partition. He lay there in the darkness, listening to the storm outside and the soft sounds of their breathing. His life had irrevocably changed in the space of a few hours. He'd broken laws, lied to guards, and committed himself to a path that could lead to prison or worse. But as he thought of Kessa's smile when she'd tasted that soup, of Nira's grateful eyes, he found he had no regrets. Sometimes he thought as sleep finally claimed him. The right choice and the safe choice weren't the same thing, and he'd made his choice.